friends, welcome to the Art of Painting with Danny. Before we get started, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you haven't already. I haven't posted very often in the past, but I'm going to start getting better, hopefully, fingers crossed. This painting is a commission that I just finished. It is an oil painting. It's on an 18 by 24 canvas, and it's a picture that someone took of their son at Disneyland, California Adventure, and they really liked it and they wanted a bigger version of it. So I'm just gonna kind of take you through the process of this whole thing. As a little disclaimer, this is not a tutorial. I'm not going to tell you how I painted this picture because it was quite a process. But what I am going to do is take you through what I learned and kind of tips and tricks for if you're wanting to learn how to oil paint. But again, this is not going to be a tutorial. So right now I'm just kind of starting with the basic values and colors. When you start with a white canvas background, it's really hard to compare colors to each other. So you kind of just have to guess and play around with what you're doing, kind of trial and error until you find a color scheme that you like. So this is going to be a pretty large chunk of the beginning of the video. I also had some issues with finding colors for this painting because the photo reference that I was using wasn't the best kind of photo reference for painting. I'll try to put in a little picture somewhere on the screen. As you can see, it's kind of typical foam quality. All of the light areas are pretty much white, and all of the dark areas are pretty much like a dark, dark, dark color. So it's really hard to find kind of values in all of that, and honestly, it was hard to figure out colors. So yeah, as you can see here, I'm just kind of throwing stuff in and hoping for the best. Usually what you want to look for if you're painting off of a photo reference, you want to look for really good color quality, you want to look for good lighting, and that means you have a specific area of light pointing onto your subject, kind of like a focal point. You want a lot of contrast, so light lights, dark darks. You want it to be clear so that you can see details. It all just kind of comes with practice and learning what photos are good to use and what photos are harder to use. So right now I'm filling in the background and kind of still trying to get an idea for what colors we're using. I decided to go with a nasty green color for the water in the beginning. Don't ask me why, I just thought it would be a good idea, but don't worry, we'll fix that in a little bit. Okay. Yeah, see, that just looks really murky, not a good idea. So that's when I realized it and I started adding blue in, because if this water is clean and clear, it's going to reflect the blue sky. I'm kind of adding some depth. So what you do when you want to add depth is things that are closer to you are going to be more saturated, so kind of more vibrant colors, if that makes sense, and they're going to be darker. And as you move back into the distance, everything's going to be significantly lighter and a little bit bluer depending on, you know, your light and everything. So I did start with an initial pretty detailed drawing. I probably didn't need to go into as much depth with the drawing initially because most of it ended up getting covered up anyway, and I just kind of had to guess with my drawing when I was painting. But it did help me because there was a lot of measurements that I had to take when initially laying this out. Lots of straight lines, lots of symmetry, that big rail in the front. I had to measure all of that out to make sure that they're the same size, just so that it looks like stable architecture. And when you have stable looking architecture in a landscape like this, it's really gonna bring it up to the next level. Your straight lines, your measured out even lines, that's gonna make it look so well rounded at the end. Doesn't look like it right now, but don't worry, we'll get there. So now I'm adding in kind of colors in the foreground, and with this, I didn't go as adventurous in the beginning. I usually like to start a little bit lighter and then move into more vibrant colors as I'm getting more detailed. Probably takes more time the way that I do it, but it works for me, and that's just what I do. In Woody's vest, this is Woody in the front, and a child that is currently in the water. In Woody's vest, I added some arbitrary colors, and what arbitrary colors are, there are basically odd colors that you don't expect in an object or material or whatever. So Woody's vest is white, so I added some yellows, I added some oranges, I added some blues. In the end, I added some reds and purples, and it's kind of a bizarre sort of idea, but it really, really helps bring those features to life and those objects to life. Just kind of going through some line quality stuff, straightening out some edges, which again doesn't matter too much until towards the end, but I try to keep things pretty clean as I'm going along so that I don't hate myself later. I'm darkening the ground now because I realized that I painted way too light, and with a light foreground it kind of makes everything flat, which you don't want. It doesn't give that dimension. right now in the video, I'm working on reflections, which is really fun. But yeah, this is kind of what brings the background to life. For water, no matter what medium you're using, just when you're painting water in general or drawing, your above land object is light, like pretty light. Your reflection's always going to be darker. So your sky, your water is going to be darker than your sky. If you have a really light building, your building in the water is going to be darker. If you have a darker building in the front, it's going to be lighter in the water. I don't know why that's a thing, it just looks better from what I've figured out over time. I had a lot of issues with the buildings in the background because in the photo reference it wasn't super detailed, so I kind of just had to make up a lot of stuff, and also I went on Google and tried to research things around the Paradise Pier and kind of what the buildings look like. It was kind of hard to find something from this perspective. Most of it was from the opposite side of the lake facing the Ferris wheel, but this is on the Ferris wheel side if you've ever been there.
Any ideas?
If you're curious as to what paints I used for my palette, I like to have kind of a pretty large palette. I know a lot of people typically like to stay away from that because it's really easy to get overwhelmed. What I like to do is I have a basic cool palette and a basic warm palette. So I start with titanium white. It mixes well with cool and warm colors. There are cool whites and warm whites. So titanium's kind of a neutral, it works really well. Cadmium Yellow Hue. I'm a big fan of all the cadmium colors because they get you the really warm, bright colors. And then for a cooler one, I used the Napoli's Yellow Hue. This is a very cool, pretty light yellow. For reds, I used 3 different reds. So I have my super warm red, which is a cadmium, a permanent rose red. This is a more cool red. Alizarin Crimson is one of my absolute favorite paints to use. It's a dark red, and this is fantastic for shadows. I usually mix this with ultramarine blue, and it gets me so close to a black color, and it looks a lot richer than black, which is really nice. For greens, phthalo yellow green. It was one that I really needed for this painting because there's a lot of green, and I wanted this painting to be pretty bright. Then I've got a permanent green light, which is also pretty light, but yeah, still super vibrant. And then I have a sap green, which is always kind of a go-to for pretty much any painting. It's pretty warm, neutral-ish. At the beginning of this painting, I was only using 2 blues. I was using Cobalt, which is a cool blue, and I used most of that in the sky. And then I've got an ultramarine blue, and this is a warm blue. Ultramarine blue, I love this. I use ultramarine and cobalt in every single painting that I do. And towards the end of the painting, you'll see kind of some new blues that are just kind of impossible to get with the blues that I use, no matter what you mix in. Manganese blue. It's kind of an in-between cobalt and ultramarine. And then cerulean, which is way lighter than all of the other ones. And this is a hard color to mix on your own, at least for me. So I just use it straight from the tube. And lastly, I have my 2 browns. So I use a burnt sienna, which is kind of lighter and warmer, and then I use a burnt umber, which is darker and cooler. That's all the paint that I used for this entire thing. I'm just gonna leave it alone for a little bit. I'm starting on the foreground now. This fence, I had a lot of issues with. I didn't take the time to make those lines, those vertical lines, straight, and I should have. But luckily, I'll fix it later. And I'm really glad that I actually wasn't too attached to those, because I did have to end up changing the water color. At this point, I realized something was off with proportions and the fence was way too tall. If Woody and this kid had stood up, the fence would be like really, really high on both of them. So I decided to take that curb and bring it up a little bit, and I feel like that really, really helped. I also had some issues with Woody's arm and his hand. In the picture, in the photo reference that I used, his hand is kind of over the edge of the bench, so it's kind of like hanging down relaxed. It just didn't look right in the painting, so I decided to just not paint that. I just got rid of it, and I kind of shortened his arm and then made it look like his arm was just going in front of the bench instead of behind the bench, if that makes sense. And now I get to add in all the fun details. This is my favorite part because I'm obsessed with details. You can't really see it on the video, but I added a ton of arbitrary colors in Woody's vest, in like even the spots and everything. So the spots, I used the combination of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue to get the rich black color. But on the lighter areas where, you know, on his shoulder, where the light's kind of coming down, I did actually add in some blues over that to keep it cool still and dark, but just to add more colors in. I think I actually added some crimson in as well to the shadows. One thing I really struggled with, along with a lot of other things, was making the kid visible in the front. He kind of just kept sinking into the background, and it took a lot of trial and error. I tried multiple different things. I tried to keep the background a little bit lighter than his shoulders. I tried to bring his hat to like a really, really white color, which I feel like doing that kind of helped bring attention to the hat, but his body kind of disappeared. So I'll show you what happens. I also had a lot of struggles with the bench because it was also kind of fading into the background. In the photo, it was a dark brown bench, and the reason you could see the child and Woody so well is because the water was completely white in the picture. And you were able to see them super well. But with this, when I was adding more colors in, and I mean that water is going to be pretty dark, they kind of just blended in with the background. So a lot of this painting was fighting that difference. And also these poles, these were a fun situation. It's okay, we got through though. The thing about painting, when you first start, it's so stressful and you're just panicking the entire time and you're like, I don't know how this is gonna work. This is just gonna look like garbage the entire time. That feeling never goes away, but what does change is that you know that you have the abilities to fix whatever issues you find, and that you have the ability to find those issues. Now I'm just kind of cleaning up some edges, just kind of refining some stuff. I'm adding some dimension to the fence because I realized it was just kind of flat. I'm just kind of adding some arbitrary colors in, which is super fun. Okay, now this is attempt number 2 at trying to make the kid pop out. I tried to highlight his shoulders a little bit so that you could see an outline of him. Didn't work too well. Now I'm just trying to make Woody's clothes look like actual clothes instead of cardboard because I painted it kind of flat. So I'm just going in with some highlights and some detail work. decided the shoulder highlight wasn't such a good idea, so I just kind of toned it down a little bit. I also felt like the water was a little too calm, I guess, so I kind of went overkill with this step, but I ended up erasing some of it. That's the really fun thing about oil paint, is it takes forever to dry, and so if you don't like something, you can literally just wipe it away. And with the water, again, I was totally fine with covering up that fence because I drew in the lines crooked and it needed to be fixed anyway, so I was like, well, whatever, we'll just paint right over it with the water. This is where I came in with the, this is the cerulean blue. I just felt like it needed that kind of bright blue added to it. Okay, so here is a trivial step in this painting. In the photo reference, the photo itself was a lot shorter, and so there wasn't as much sky in the picture. And with this painting, I did use a bigger canvas, and so the sky just kind of went up and kept going up. And so I felt like there needed to be some sort of frame on the top and also something to kind of loop your eyes back down. When you're painting, you want to make sure that you kind of guide the viewer's eyes throughout the painting. So for me, when I looked at this painting, I went immediately to Woody's head. I'd follow his arm down to the kid. I'd go up to the fence because that line kind of pulls you up. And then I'd follow that fence over to the pole, follow the pole up, and then it would just take me off the painting. And you don't want that. You want to guide the viewer back into your painting when they start looking around. And so I wanted something where I'd look up to the pole and then something that would bring me back down to the center of attention, which is Woody and this child. So I decided to add an overhang. And that was fun because I just completely made that up. So a little bit of trial and error with this. I also felt like adding in this overhang really separated the foreground from the background, which is what this really needed. I felt like everything was just kind of blending together, and I didn't want that. This has nothing to do with what's going on right now, but throughout this painting I used liquid, a fine detail liquid. There are different types. To be honest, I haven't noticed much of a difference between using them other than consistency of the liquid. So this fine detail one's a little bit more liquidy, whereas other ones are kind of more thick and jelly-like. This is really good to use if you want thinned down paint, but you don't want to use paint thinner. I don't particularly like using paint thinner to thin down my paint because I feel like it kind of takes away the opacity, I guess. It just makes it more flexible to use. I also use this at the very end to glaze my painting, and that it just pulls it completely together, because as you're painting, I mean, oil paint, different paints dry matte, other paints dry kind of shiny. If you use liquid in certain paints, it'll make it shiny. So just using liquid at the very end helps pull it all together. decided to put more effort into these poles because I was kind of putting them off. What I like to do is when I'm working on something and I start to stress out about it, I have to stop touching it and work on something else while I think about it in the back of my mind and how I can fix it. And then once I've kind of come up with a plan, then I'll go in and start fixing the issue. I was having a really hard time with the left pole, and come to find out, it was because I just made them different sizes. And so I'm gonna fix that pretty soon in this painting. And that really helped the entire painting. It's just a tiny little drawing error that I had. When I fixed it, it looked so much better. The top was competing too much, and it also kind of looked like a bunch of McDonald's next to each other. So I tried to change the color a little bit. This was again a trial and error thing because I was completely making this up, which isn't the best thing. Usually I'll try to find some sort of photo reference online to go off of, just so I can see like perspective and colors and things like that to work with. Even if you're not completely copying the picture, which you shouldn't do if it's not your own picture or you don't have permission to use it. But I mean, so long as you make it your own, there's nothing wrong with looking at a photo of something to figure out all of the architecture in it, or the colors, or perspective, or things like that. It just helps a ton. Also, I'm wearing a Disneyland sweatshirt in the majority of this painting because I wear that all the time. Totally wasn't planned, but it just so happened to be a Disney painting while I was wearing it. I'll just stop talking now. Cutesy and lacy and stuff. It didn't end up working super well, so I just went in and filled them in and changed the color eventually. I also felt like it was looking a little too cartoony at this point, just with the kind of outlines over the arches and under the arches. So I'll show you how I fixed that. So I decided to add in kind of, honestly, I don't even know what they are. I just wanted some sort of lacy pattern. Maybe they were bricks, maybe it was plastic, I don't know. but I literally just took my little paintbrush and I just went around the arches and just went bloop, 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 like all over the entire thing. And then I went over it with a couple other colors. Also, my earring fell down my ear, so I apologize if that's gonna bother anybody. I also apologize if I just pointed that out and you weren't noticing it before. I actually have a friend in this video, like to the side of me, so I'm talking a lot in this little clip, so sorry about that. I tried to focus my day on these posts because I ran out of ideas for the arches and I needed a little break from them. They kind of looked like rainbows to me at this point, and although rainbows would work with this painting because it's Disney and happy and colorful, I just wasn't feeling it. So I tried to avoid my problems there and go to my other problems, which are these posts. Part's a little tedious, but it's necessary, so just a lot of playing with highlights and shadows, and I think I struggled a lot with this because I really wanted to make them contrasty, but if I made such a huge contrast on these posts, they would become the focal point of the painting. And so a lot of this was a battle between how much do I want to contrast and how much attention do I want these posts to have. So it was a little bit of trial and error. I changed the bench from brown to red, and that, just look at the difference. That just totally brings it to the front. And I felt like doing that, it made it a lot easier to see the boy. I must have just not been paying attention, but I did at one point darken the water again in the front because I just felt like the kid's body was just sinking into the water too much. And so making the background darker really helped bring the kid forward. And I highlighted his shoulders, which looks a little cartoony at this point. I ended up filling them in with just a light color. So I just changed the color of his shirt pretty much, and that just... decided to face my problems at the top and start working on the arches again. Oh, nope, just kidding, not yet. I did end up changing the colors of the initial arch though to kind of just more of a faded, like kind of greenish, brownish, I don't know, kind of muddy color, honestly. Usually I like to avoid muddy colors, but sometimes you do need it just to kind of neutralize things and just make them so they're not the center of attention, if that makes sense. The bench is dry, I can go in with the details on kind of the posts holding it up, the support beams. Adding some dimension in now so that it doesn't just look like flat lines holding the bench up. They actually look like beams. And I'm just cleaning up some more edges. I feel like those got kind of messy as I was figuring life out. And I didn't really like the colors of these little lacy things, so I just kind of played around with it some more, and I ended up liking that a lot better. lastly, the shadows needed to be darker in the foreground. And there's my signature. Yeah, that's the entire painting. If you liked this video, go ahead and subscribe, turn on your notifications, like, comment, do whatever you feel like, share with your friends. It would really help me out a lot. If you have any ideas of things that you want me to paint or draw or make, go ahead and send those ideas my way and we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.